Welcome to the Think Factory podcast. We got one question for you. What keeps you up at night?
I'm your host, Chris Santomassimo, and with me this morning is my co-host, Marc Snyderman.
Hey, nice to meet everybody today.
So we're on the day of our launch of the Think Factory podcast, and what we wanted to do was to share with you a conversation about what the podcast is, what we're hoping to achieve, and how we can help you grow your business through the podcast.
We're super excited to be here today and really bring the Think Factory to life. It's a concept that we've had for a while that we've been trying to figure out exactly how we wanted to really highlight what our clients do and give them an opportunity to speak with you and learn about their businesses, how they can grow, how we grow. So there's lots of different things we can do here at the Think Factory.
Yeah, and as you'll hear a little bit later in this podcast recording, you know, our firm, OGC Solutions, is really an outside general counsel for our clients. And in that role, we really get close to the business. So what we want to do is not only be the attorneys or the lawyers for our clients, but really help them prosper, give them a chance to spotlight themselves, talk about what makes them unique, what keeps them up at night from a business perspective. And together we can all learn from the sharing that goes on with those conversations.
Right. There's so many great companies here in New Jersey that people don't even know exist. We've had the fortune of representing them as attorneys for a while. And it's great to be able to find a way that we can help highlight what they're doing. And maybe there's business out there for them that they can generate by talking about it. But at the least, what I always like to do is make sure that when you're having conversations with clients, and especially on podcasts, is we all learn from each other, right? And we learn from mistakes better than we learn from successes, because it's always easier to point out where things went wrong. I always say, we learn from failure every day. And, so I'd like to know that we can get our clients on. Maybe we can get them to talk about some of the things the trials and tribulations they've had. And I think those sharing moments and, us guiding them through those as attorneys and counselors, has been really, it's what keeps me going every day, is helping clients that way. And I know, Chris, that's kind of what keeps you driving as well.
Yeah, and I learn a lot from these folks too. I mean, we've picked up not only little tidbits, but also really big ideas about, what one client is doing. We can share it with other clients. Not that we're trading confidential information or anything, but just tactics and strategies. But at the end of the day, the challenge that all these companies face is how do they acquire new business, new customers? How do they go to market? How do they structure themselves? And really, how do they protect themselves, but also open themselves up to opportunities? So if we can help further that, I think we're doing everybody a service. And the podcast really is open not only to clients that we represent or former clients that we've represented in the past, but our friends and people in our networks. Because together, I think we can help each other prosper a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the concept of, getting together with people that want to talk about business and want to talk about, how do you mitigate risk in business and how do you figure out how you're going to grow, whether that's organically or inorganically. Later today, we're actually hosting an event for mergers and acquisitions and talking about what it's like to go buy a company. What do you have to do to prepare to do that? How do you prepare to sell a company? So these are all things that we love to talk about and do, and I think the podcast is going to be a great opportunity for us to push this out to the world.
Well, you really nailed it too, especially when you're talking about selling a company. If you're representing the seller, your job hopefully doesn't really start at the time you're negotiating a transaction, but rather 18 months, 2 years before, when you're going to work with the client to really make sure that they've got a strong foundation. They've got everything from a pitch deck to the right corporate governance structure to insurance. They're managing the challenges and the claims that they might have on their behalf or against them. And really, you're trying to help the owner or shareholders maximize the value of the company. And if you can do that, you're worth well more than the fee that you might charge, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same goes for when companies are looking to go be acquisitive and go buy companies, right? They don't know what they're, you don't really know what you're getting into until you start down the process. And having professionals around you that can help you understand what is it going to be like to go through the process and how do you prepare yourself better to integrate, to do the things that are going to be necessary to be successful in the acquisition. also really important to get started ahead of time. And I think, your point about, starting 18 months early is really important, right? Because so many companies just think that you can, you're just going to show up to the party. Somebody's going to show up and say, hey, we want to buy your company. Well, if you're not ready and you haven't done any of the homework to get there, it's going to be a real slog.
Yeah. And I think, professionals maybe do this to themselves sometimes. Many companies that we work with, either on the buy side or sell side, are really reluctant to bring in professionals, lawyers, accountants, investment bankers, and others, because they've been burned in the past. They've used a lawyer that charged them way more than they should have for a service that wasn't so great. And I think, that in many cases is an unforced error, really, by the professional. But what it suggests is that there's not really a cohesiveness between the client and the consultant or the attorney, where their interests are really not intertwined the right way. There's that tension that, clients always think about a clock ticking every time they call a lawyer, and what they don't realize is they probably have the wrong lawyer who's not really looking after their best interest. And they could really improve themselves in terms of the company value and risk minimization if they would bring in the right professionals much earlier and smooth out their path rather than having peaks and valleys where you got to bring people in on an emergent basis.
Right. I mean, you hit the heart of why OGC Solutions exists, right? Yeah. What were we trying to? What are we all trying to do? We're trying to disrupt the industry, the legal industry in particular, and it goes the same for accountants and other professionals. They charge too much, and they don't think through the models, and they're not thinking through, what's the best model that can exist for clients these days, and also helps yourself, right? I mean, there's something to be said about subscription model services and flattening your income and not having those ups and downs of the industry that exist and really cause a lot of issues for larger firms and for even smaller firms. So having a different model really changes the game, right? And it sets you up for success for the client and for you, and puts you in a position where the clients understand and don't have to worry about, is the clock ticking today? What do I get for my dollar? Can I call whenever I want?
Right.
Can I get the advice that I need when I need it, as opposed to maybe 10 days from now, or maybe I got a bill for $5,000 for a weekend's worth of work that I only needed a yes or no answer to.
That's it, and I think that more traditional law firm services model is what creates that tension, because every time they get a bill, a client thinks, well, every time I call, I log time, and they multiply that by some ridiculous hourly rates, especially when you get to metropolitan areas, right? And then you got a bill. And what I think is missing is a real focus on value. And that applies to accountants and investment bankers and all those types of folks as well. It's really focusing on what is the value that you bring to the table. And it's not about making sure that you hit your timer every time the client calls so that you log every second that you spend with them, but rather, how am I delivering value that is reflective of, consistent with the business, and helps the executives make really informed decisions. And I think, lawyers and other professionals really need to think about creativity. And I don't think you can be really creative with your solutions unless you really understand not only the industry that you're focused on, but also what are your clients' specific challenges and attributes that make them valuable and successful.
Right.
And, that traditional model, which is, the antithesis to a subscription model, is one that really keeps the lawyers at arm's length, or the other professionals outside, and they're only brought in on limited engagements. So I think they don't really demonstrate the value, but in many cases, their whole billing structure doesn't allow them to get to the point where they can really demonstrate value.
Yeah, I use an example from that was one of the reasons why when I started my own firm originally before we merged, as to what my whole thought process was in starting a subscription model. And it was when I first started as an attorney, going way back when on Times Square in Manhattan, and we had all these fashion clients. We had great clients, really fun stuff. And when Jill Stewart was she was going to open a store down in Soho on Broome Street, she called us to come down to look at space with her and actually negotiate lease terms with her on the spot. And I said, wow, it was really, I thought that was normal. And then, 10, 20 years goes by, and I'm hiring outside attorneys, and I'm thinking, I'm running my company. I'm like, I'm not going to bring my attorney here. That's crazy. They're going to charge me $750 an hour, some absurd amount of money to go negotiate a lease. I can do that myself.
And they're going to bring an associate
Yeah.
and a
They're gonna show up-
senior
they're gonna show-
associate.
yeah.
It's going to be a whole train of people.
Be a whole train of people. We don't need that. And I said, where did that value go away? Right? The value of the attorney that could be there and help you negotiate on the spot with the landlord didn't change. Right? There's still a huge value that if you had an attorney with you, you could actually do some really good stuff on the spot. And, so I said, well, if you had a subscription model and they would call you, the client would call you and say, hey, I'm going to look at new space. Can you come with me? And I had it happen, and I went with my clients, and we negotiated with the landlord on the spot. Like, I was like, hey, we're looking at, I think you need to give us, we have to break our lease. You're going to have to pay that off. We're going to look for a couple months free. Here's what we need done. Now I want this wall moved. I want this wall moved. I want this wall moved. And you're going to upgrade the lights. You're going to upgrade the carpet. You're going to upgrade the ceiling tiles. And the landlord was like, oh, okay. But we did it to her on the spot.
What's great about your example, though, is by being in early, you not only get, the progress that you want, but when a tenant and a landlord get together and they start having conversations and the tenant says, hey, I love the space and let's put together a lease, it's a lot harder to start negotiating off a lease that the landlord prepared.
Yeah.
Where your business terms are still in flux. And then you're always sort of fighting an uphill battle, right? That's the problem with the mid-cap companies, or the problems that they face, is that they're not large enough to justify bringing in a lawyer in-house as their general counsel. If they could hire one as an employee and they would know their cost, it would be a fixed cost essentially, because you'd know the salary plus benefits plus bonus, etc. And you could put a number on that and put it in your budget. And then you would call the general counsel to come with you to talk to the landlord.
Right.
And he would know, or she would know, what you're trying to achieve. And being at the table early just makes that whole transaction take a lot less time, and you're going to get to close a lot faster and then get on with business, hopefully.
Yeah, that's why the virtual legal department model is so interesting. And I think, we're really, I'd say we're on the cutting edge, but, we kind of are. Like, there's just not a lot of attorneys out there understanding that this is a real value add to the clients, but they also don't have the ability to change their models.
I think so. Every time I see things in in the trade press about economies changing, big law firms are going to have to change their model. They just seem to do what they've always done, which is raise their rates and have their banner years. Probably because they're doing the same amount of work at a higher rate, so obviously their numbers go up. I don't know how much they actually collect versus what they bill, but that model sort of feeds itself. And what I found sometimes, especially when you're dealing with outside directors at a company, they're just going to go with the brand names because they're afraid of choosing somebody that is just as experienced but's going to give you better service for low cost, because they don't want to be accused of making a bad decision if things don't go the way that they want them to. But people who are a little more progressive in that way, are willing to think outside the box, they really gravitate toward our model because it makes much more sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's always hard to understand when people say, well, it's too cheap, it's too inexpensive, how could it be good? Right. Because it doesn't have, because the legal industry's created this, number that people see, and they're like, well, it has to be these crazy numbers. If it's not these crazy numbers, then
or else it ain't good.
They're not good. Yeah. But no, I mean, you can actually have nice offices and do really good work and pay your people really well and do really good things without charging an arm and a leg.
Well, just like a lot of our clients, the technology is key. If you can manage information effectively and cost effectively, so that we don't need lots of layers of overhead in the form of more assistance, that's where the savings come. We have all the right tools and all the cutting edge tools, and I think the technology is what sets us apart, in addition to the way we approach the matters. So for a mid-cap company who needs, a more strategic value proposition from its lawyers, having that fixed fee, that controllable cost, makes a ton of sense for them, because they can budget it, they can bring you in 1,000 times a month or 2 times a month, but know that they're not going to see peaks and valleys in terms of what it costs.
Exactly, and meeting the clients where they want to be met, right? If they want to be on Slack and they like Slack and that's the way they communicate, what's the problem?
There isn't. You can't be rigid. It's just like, and circling back to the reason we have this whole podcast launch is, you got to think a little bit outside the box, but you have to be flexible. And I think, being flexible requires you to have information about what you're trying to achieve, how you're trying to get there, learning from other people, but also, as you say, making sure that you're flexible with clients so that there's that easy interchange. And the more efficient we can be, the better we're going to do in terms of the work that we do, and the less expensively we can, come to market. And then what that does is open up this whole, this new universe of buying services to clients that never thought they had access to it before. Mm-hmm. It's pretty exciting.
That's real exciting. And even more exciting is, actually being able to do this and sit down and have great conversations. And I can't wait for, to bring clients and guests and friends in and really have some, solid conversations about, what it is that makes them tick, what's keeping them up at night, all the unique things that our clients do. That's what I love, going into a new business and learning what they're doing and how they're doing it, because it's always amazing to see how many different models are out there. Business is business, and in the end, a lot of it is the same, and you can layer methodologies over it. But everybody has a unique perspective on a market and a marketplace and what's making them successful, and highlighting those things and getting them out in the world. What could be more fun than that?
I have a client that gave me a compliment a couple of years ago and said that I was generating almost as many leads as his business development
That's
person,
awesome. Yeah.
I get jazzed from that. Sometimes I'd rather do that for clients than do the legal work, even though I don't get paid for it. But, no, it's cool. It's not only good to send leads to clients and help them, develop those leads, but to help close a deal is even more satisfying. So that's why we wear the two hats. I think it's more fun for us, frankly, and enhances the value that we bring to the table. So, and the fact that we enjoy it makes it that much better.
Yeah, if we could make Think Factory into a marketplace for businesses that want to be around us and understand the OGC model and just friends of the firm, I think that would be a lot of fun and really cool stuff.
I think so too. Even if we never talk about OGC Solutions, we just talk about them. And in fact, some of the content that we've already generated focuses exclusively on the people that we're talking to.
Exactly.
And that I think is amazing because, again, we're going to learn from it. And if we can help just boost their value in the marketplace just a little bit, then everybody wins for sure.
100%.
So, thanks for listening in on this launch episode for the Think Factory podcast. As you can tell from Mark and my discussion, we're pretty excited about the ability to go out and help your company get spotlighted and advertised. No cost to anybody who participates, really. The value that you're going to bring to us in terms of the learning is far more than we could ever charge. And frankly, that's not really our model, to charge people to help them with this sort of thing. So please reach out to us on thethinkfactory.com if you'd like to join the podcast. And hopefully, if you're listening to this, we'll reach out to you to schedule some time. Again, I'm Chris Santomassimo from OGC Solutions, a co-host of the Think Factory podcast, and with Marc Snyderman, my partner here at OGC Solutions.
Thanks, everybody.